Anyone just add the class or enrollment issues at all? Okay. Welcome. So if you just added, see me after class. We'll just go over the details real quickly. Today, I am so happy to have back with us a speaker that has been here many, many times, always a class favorite. We have Mark Klaas here today. And this semester, the topic being activism, I was thinking about that. You're going to have speakers all throughout the semester who are activists, and they come about it in all different ways. Like last week, the speaker being an academic who actually is very passionate about her subject of drug legalization. And we'll have people who've been involved in topics for other reasons. Today, Mark's reason he'll talk to you about couldn't be more tragic, how he got involved in what he does. But he took the most horrible tragedy one can imagine and has given so much back to the community since then. He is the founder and president of the Klaas Kids Foundation. And Klaas, by the way, spelled K-L-A-A-S. So those of you who want to Google that later on after class. And also Beyond Missing. These are nonprofits that he started and is president of, whose mission is to stop crimes against children, help families. Please welcome Mark Klaas.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, now it's green. Now can you hear me? Hey, I don't know what to say. Can you hear me now? Yeah, all right. I'll just speak loudly. Okay. As Alan said, I've been here many times before. This was the first time, though, that I was a little hesitant about accepting the invitation, simply because the events that informed my life occurred so long ago, really before many of you were probably even born. My saga begins on the first of wow, it has been so long. On the 1st of October in 1993. I was a car rental franchise operator in San Francisco. I lived in Sausalito in a condo with my longtime girlfriend. We'd been there for 10 years together. And I had a 12-year-old daughter named Polly, who lived in Petaluma, California, with her mother, Eve. Petaluma is about 30 miles north of Sausalito. I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with the geography of the Bay Area. We had a terrible marriage, but we strived to make our divorce successful because we both loved our daughter very much. So I regularly paid child support. Eve regularly gave me as much access to my daughter as I wanted. She would spend 2 days with Violet and I every week. We would spend holidays together, and we would go on vacations together every year. So it was a very amicable divorce. Things were working out as well as they possibly could. However, on the home front, there were some contention between my girlfriend, Violet, and my daughter. And I think that, I'm not sure where that came from, but I suspect there's probably always issues in these kinds of blended situations. But after years of contention, Polly and Violet actually were starting to appreciate each other and spend time together. And Violet would take her to the mall where they would go shopping, and they discuss boys. And she was trying to help her emerge as a viable human being with a lot of possibilities into her high school years. On the other hand, I had taught Polly how to swim, and she was a terrific swimmer. I was teaching her how to play baseball. We spent a lot of time at the local ballpark. She was shagging flies. We were playing catch. She wanted to play well enough to be able to play with the boys. And the overriding thing here is that she was a very shy little girl, and she really wanted to overcome her shyness and get out into the world, and she wanted to be a force to be reckoned with. That's what she really wanted to do. So to that end, she was in theater. She was a wonderful young actress. She was in band. She was seemingly a very good little clarinet player. She moved around all the time. Her mother seemed to move every year. I think she was in 7 or 8 schools by the time she was in the 7th grade. It was a point of contention between us, but I guess it was nothing that could not be overcome. We were believing that Polly would reach a point where she wanted to come live with Violet and I because we offered stability. We offered a very stable environment for her, and we had even had discussions along that line. But that's just leading up to this horrible thing that happened. On the morning of October 1st, 1993, I did the same thing I did every day. I put on my suit, I put on my hat, I put the newspaper under my arm, and I waited for the bus to take me to San Francisco. By 7:30 in the morning, I was walking up California Street to my franchise, my Hertz franchise at California's San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel. Maybe some of you have seen that. It's an absolutely beautiful facility. After work that day, which was very hard as usual, but I love the interaction. I love talking to the tourists and setting them up for rental cars and setting them up for tours and things like that. After I got home that day, I changed my clothes. I helped Violet put dinner together, and then I called Polly, and we had a short conversation, as we did many evenings during the week. I had nothing particular that I wanted to tell her. She had nothing particular that she wanted to hear from me or that she wanted to tell me. So we had our brief conversation. She had some girlfriends coming over a little later. They were going to have a slumber party. She was very excited about that. Before I hung up the phone, I said, "Polly, I love you." She said, "Daddy, I love you too." At about 10:30, 11:30 that evening, we were in bed asleep. And I remember being lulled from sleep by an alarm of some sort. There was an alarm, and I opened my eyes, and Violet was laying in the bed next to me with the phone, and it wasn't an iPhone. It was a old, one of those old phones on a cord and everything. And so, it was obvious what it was, even in my slumbered state. And she goes, no, it can't be. Here, tell Mark. And she handed me the phone. And it was my daughter's estranged stepfather, a fellow named Alan. And Alan said, "Polly's been kidnapped." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" He says, "Yeah, she's been kidnapped. She was having her slumber party, and a knife-wielding, bearded stranger entered the bedroom, and he tied up Polly's girlfriends, and he threatened to slit their throats, and he then stole Polly into the night." And I said, "What you're telling me is impossible." And he goes, "No, it really happened, Mark. I'm sorry to tell you this." And I said, "Well, I'm going to come right up." And he goes, No. The police don't want you coming up here. They don't want a disgruntled father trampling on evidence. And like I'm, slowly, a panic is slowly building up inside of me. I wasn't freaking out or anything, but it's like, this is really alarming. And it was alarming for several reasons. Obviously, because this was happening to me. But any of you who grew up in the Bay Area should know that there was an epidemic of kidnapping in the late 80s and early 90s in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was one little girl after another that would disappear. And sometimes you'd turn on the evening news and there would be this distraught parent looking into a TV camera, tears streaming down their face, trying to answer the reporter's questions. No, she would never run away. Yes, I will stay by the phone until the ransom call comes in. And no, I will never give up hope. Well, after a couple of days, these stories would be relegated to the bottom fold of the newspaper's old world media, 20th century media. And after a few more days after that, they would disappear altogether. And then we would all be left wondering, what happened to these kids? Who takes these kids? What do the police do? Do they close these cases or do they remain open? Because they just stop. We never hear anything else about them. The kidnappers are seemingly never caught. There's never a discussion about who these characters are, how we can protect ourselves against them. So I always thought, well, you know what? I told my kid not to talk to strangers. Everything should be okay. This can't happen that often. But then it happened. So I'm like freaking out a little bit. You know, it's starting to build up. And so I called the Petaluma police. I go, what's going on? And they were like, well, who are you? You know, and I said, well, I'm Paulie's dad. And they go, we don't know what you're talking about. And it's like they just played this give and take with me until finally they go, well, yeah, your daughter has been kidnapped. And it's like, Jesus Christ, man, really? Really? That's how we have to get to this? And they you know, as I was having that conversation, there was a knock on our door, like at midnight, 1 o'clock, something like that. So Violet answers the door, and in come a couple of our local Sausalito police officers. And I didn't think much of it because by that time I was on the phone to the FBI. I called the FBI because Charles Lindbergh called the FBI when his kid was kidnapped. And I said, look, my kid's been kidnapped. You have to go to Petaluma and do something. And they said, well, we'll call you back. We'll see what's going on. We'll get back to you. And so then I put the phone down, and I'm talking to the Sausalito guys, and they said they were just doing a check to see if everything was okay. But then what I realized later was that that's not what they were doing at all. What they were doing is they came to my house to see if I took my kid. And they did that because of over the more than 200,000 kidnappings in the United States every year. Like 99% of those are committed by non-custodial parents. And the typical victim is a 6 to 11-year-old white girl. So it made all the sense in the world that they would come to me, but I wasn't thinking along those terms. We showed them around our condo. It wasn't very big. We took them into Paulie's room. The only thing in there was a bed, a little desk where she did homework, and a big poster of Alf, the alien, the TV alien. Like I said to her one day, I said, Paulie, let's get a poster for your room. You can have anything you want. And I thought she'd go for some rock band or something, and she goes, oh, I want Alf. And it's like, really? So, anyway, they left. The FBI called me back. They said they were on the way. I got a call from an FBI agent named Eddie Fryer. He said he was on the way. He would contact me with any updates that he had. And I'm like, good. Finally, somebody is talking to me. Somebody's communicating with me, and maybe we can work something out here. Maybe this will end. Maybe this is just a bad dream. Maybe I can wake up. I don't know. But what's going on here isn't a good thing. So Violet and I stayed up for the rest of the night, as you might imagine. You don't go back to sleep after something like that. And at about 6 o'clock in the morning, KCBS, the local news radio station, was playing in the background. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, their lead story for the news was that Klaas had been kidnapped from her home in Petaluma, California the night before. Well, that drove this home unlike anything else had. I'd had numerous conversations with police officers. I had them in my house. I'd spoken to the stepfather, all of these things, but then all of a sudden, this was a new kind of a reality. And this took me to a different kind of a place because I realized that I had to engage one of the most difficult tasks I had ever engaged in my life right now. I had to call the members of my family to tell them that Paulie had been kidnapped. So I did it, man. My sisters are crying. My mother's going, oh, good grief, no. I hear screams. I hear whimpers. Finally, I called my last sister, Mariana, and I told her, and she goes, don't do anything until I get there. Well, she lived in Lafayette. She was at my house within 30 minutes. Then the three of us got into a car, and we shot up to Petaluma. Violet and I did not return home for 65 days. But we did have somebody come and watch our house for us. In fact, the next day, we asked somebody to come to our house and gather some things for us so that we could stay up in Petaluma temporarily as this thing played out. And so we went to Petaluma, and we drove right up to the neighborhood, and it was like one of those episodic cop shows. There was crime scene tape around the house. There were uniformed and non-uniformed officers lingering around the house doing whatever cops do during an investigation. There were TV satellite trucks, the microwave trucks, everywhere. There were coils of wire all throughout the streets getting to the reporters who were getting ready to do their stand-ups for the morning news. The story was breaking. I mean, it was really breaking, and it was really freaking me out, but not to the point where I was going to cry. So a reporter sees me, and she doesn't know me. I knew her because I'd seen her on TV for years, and I guess she could just see the look in my face. And she goes, "Are you the father of that little girl, of Polly?" And I go, "Yeah, I am, And she goes, "Well, could I ask you a few questions?" And then I thought back to all of those other parents that I'd seen throughout the years, tearfully telling their story to the TV camera, only to disappear a few minutes later. And I said, "No." I said, "I don't think I want to talk to you. This is a private matter, and that's how we're going to handle it." And I started to walk away, and she's jamming to keep up with me, pulling the cord along and everything. And she goes, "Well, listen." She goes, "I can get you more publicity for your missing daughter with 10 seconds on the evening news than you'll be able to generate by nailing missing flyers on telephone poles for the next 100 years. And you know what? That made perfect sense to me. I got it. She was absolutely correct. So I said, "Where do you want me to stand?" So that was the first of a million interviews that I've probably done. But I looked right into the camera, and I said, "You've got to help me here." I said, "If you've got her, you've got to bring her home. She needs to be with her family." I spoke right to the kidnapper. I didn't really answer a lot of questions, but I spoke right to the kidnapper. Finally, we were able to get to the house. Eddie Fryer came out and introduced himself, the FBI agent that I had mentioned a few minutes earlier. A couple of other officers came out and introduced themselves. I saw Polly's mom. She was a mess, as you could only imagine. She actually had been asleep in the room. She had been asleep in the house, in the next bedroom when Polly was kidnapped. And she slept through the whole thing. I suspect she's probably still riddled with guilt over that, although she claims she isn't, but that's not the story for today. Then the cop said, "Look, we need to talk to you down at the station." And I said, "Yeah, let's do that. Let's go." And so we went to the station, and they started asking me a lot of pointed questions, and I answered them as truthfully as I could. They even asked me, "Did you have anything to do with this? Have you bought an insurance policy for Polly lately?" Well, I'd actually transferred her over to my Kaiser plan recently, and that's sort of where I thought he was coming from. And I go, "Oh, yeah, I did." And then everybody's looking around going, "Oh, yeah, wow, we got this now. This was all about money." And then I explained, "No, it's a medical situation. It's for medical insurance, not a life policy." So they said, "Look, what's going to happen here is that in most of these cases, parents are the ones that did it. So we're going to ask you a lot of questions, and we're going to have you back plenty of times." And I said, "Man, you can do what you want." I said, and I apologize in advance, I said, "I'll dance naked on the table if that's what you want, if that's going to make this any better." And they said, No, you don't have to do that. You just have to answer our questions." And I said, "That's fine, that's not a problem." So we then engaged that dialogue, and they wanted to know, is there anybody in my family that might have some kind of a connection? And quite frankly, there were a couple of people. And I said, "Sure, here's who it could be, here's who, could have some kind of a connection." I had a brother that was, he was messed up with a lot of drugs and stuff, and ran around with some of the wrong people. But I didn't think there was a possibility of a real connection, but I wasn't going to hold anything back. So I just told them anything that they wanted to know. Shortly after that, after we left the police station, there was this man that I saw at the house. First I saw him at the house when we were there, and then when we left the police station, I saw the same guy there. And he was kind of looking at me, and he's going like that. And so I asked the cop on the way out the door, I said, that man. I said, he was at the house too, and he keeps focusing on me. And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, that's David Collins. He's the father of Kevin Collins. Well, Kevin Collins was a little boy that was kidnapped out of the Haight-Ashbury in the 1980s. It was a huge case at the time. I think Kevin made the cover of Newsweek magazine, in fact. It was such a big case. Magazine, 20th century media. So I thought, wow, great. So I went up and talked to him, and I said, man, I'm really glad to see you. Like, you know where I'm coming from, you know? And he said, I said, why are you here? And he goes, well, maybe I can help you in some way. And I said, I don't have any money, man. You know, he goes, oh, I don't do this for money. I do this because I have to do this. And we were inseparable for the next 10 days. I wanted David right next to me every moment of time. When I first met him, he said, here, let's go step into my office and we can discuss this. And so we got into his old Buick, which he seemed to live out of. And we had the first of many meetings there. And David helped us establish a search center so that we could get this huge influx of volunteer activity focused and somehow organized. And so I befriended people, you know, people that I'd never known before. People that I'd known all my life were nowhere to be found, but people that I'd never met before were all over themselves trying to help us. And it turns out that many of them really were trying to help us. Some of them had their own agenda, as it turned out, but that's for later in the story. So we organized a search center. We continued to talk to the police. The news never got any better. It only got worse. I thought their job was to bring my daughter home, and she was nowhere to be found. They had nothing for me. And in fact, every day for like the 8 weeks that we went through this, every day they would hold another briefing. And they had a public information officer, and he would say, well, folks, I'm sorry, but we have nothing new to report today. And it just killed me a little bit inside every day when he said that, because I knew that these stories disappear. They disappear really quickly. And once they disappear, the kids are forgotten and the kids are never found. So that was my dilemma. How do I keep this story from disappearing? That was my objective towards the goal of recovering my daughter. So we came up with any kind of crazy thing we could come up with. At one point, after about a week, I was doing something on one of the radio stations, and I said, I had a dream last night. I said, I had a dream that Polly was lashed to a tree on Mount Tamalpais, and I'd like people to come and help me find her. And I don't even know I did have that dream. It was a terrible dream. It's funny, you know, during the day, when you're faced with something like this, during the day, you can function because there's things to do. There's distractions. There's people. There's food, but we didn't eat food. There's the world is going on. But at night, it's a whole different story, because at night, you have solitude. You have darkness. You're left to your own thoughts. And they were punishing thoughts. They were nightmarish thoughts. They were horrible thoughts. And that's from where this dream came. Well, the next day, all kinds of people showed up to help us search. So we jerry-rigged a search operation. We got out some city maps. We sent people to Mount Tamalpais, which is just over the bay here in Marin County. And we sent out several hundred searchers. One guy answered the call. He was in town for Fleet Week. He was in the Navy. His name was Brad Dennis, and he actually had search and rescue experience. He was this really, really, really sort of solid Christian guy. You know, had an incredible belief in the Bible and in the teachings of Jesus. And I mean, to his soul, you know, it was like he wanted to give everything that he had. So I put him in charge, and he organized some of the search protocols, many of the search protocols that are followed to this day in every volunteer search for a missing person that goes on, in every last one. And so we had all kinds of people, but the cops didn't like that idea. They said, you're not going to do searches. If you do searches, you're going to trample evidence. The investigation is our business. And I said, man, we're doing searches, whether you like it or not. This is my daughter, and I'm calling this shot. We're sending these people out. And he said to me, if you send searchers out, I'm going to arrest your search director. So I said, oh, Jesus, I can't do that. So I went and talked to Brad, and I said, Brad, this is what they said. And he goes, go for it. We'll send searchers out. So I went back and I said, we're sending searchers out. They never arrested anybody. And in fact, over time, they began to see the value of what we were doing. Because all of a sudden, we had a huge influx of volunteers. And people want to help. They want to be able to do something in a situation like that. But what can you do? I mean, we had people stuffing envelopes with flyers. We had people answering phone calls for tips. We had people handling media relations. We had people handling various aspects of what it was we were trying to do. But you don't need hundreds and hundreds of people to do that. But when you put people out on search teams, the more the merrier, as long as you're well organized, as long as you can do something viable, as long as you can train the civilians to a point where they understand that if they go out in the field and they find something that looks suspicious, they don't touch it, they don't smell it, they don't pick it up and put it in their pocket. What they do is they find their search team leader, they report it to the law enforcement, and then they'll come out and make the determination. And we were able to achieve that in pretty short order. It was really pretty wondrous. But it created a story. It created a story that kept Polly's story alive, her case alive. And amazingly, we went from week to week to week with it staying alive. One week, man, we were just down on it. We had nothing left. And then all of a sudden, the young actress Winona Ryder says, well, I'll put up a couple of $100,000 of my own money to bring this girl home alive. It was a big story. It was an international story then because she was an international movie star. And the reward went from nothing to $200,000. You would think on the face of it that that's really a good thing. But you know what $200,000? You know what the temptation of $200,000 is for a nefarious character? All of a sudden, the phones were ringing off the hook from people wanting to just throw something out there in hopes that it would mean something, or people with extortion plots. Oh my God! One guy said, "Yeah, we've got the fucking little bitch, and we're going to kill her if you don't give us the money." Well, they were able to trace a guy's phone. And he was just some dirtbag. You know, they arrested him and sent him to prison for probably just a couple of years, you know, where he did it again. But they got a hold of him. On that very first day, I told you that somebody went to my house to pick up some stuff. Well, when he was at the house gathering our stuff, he got a phone call from a girl. And she goes, "Hi, it's me, Polly." And it's like, no way. He goes, "It's me, Polly." She goes, "He's not here right now." She goes, "I'm in Daly City at the Days Inn." Well, my brother-in-law, Hank, man, he's like, "Okay, Polly, we'll take care of it right now." So he hangs up the phone. He calls the FBI. He says, "I just got a call from Polly. She's at the Days Inn in Daly City." Man, cop cars were peeling out of that police station like nobody's business. We waited up, and we waited up, and we waited up, and nothing happened at all on that very first night. Second night. It was the very second night. So I'm laying there at about 2 o'clock in the morning, starting to freak out yet again. I hadn't slept yet. So like I'm in despair. I really am. My God, ladies and gentlemen, you have no idea what it's like. I was just sort of at my wit's end. I got up and I went out to the parking lot across the street of a supermarket. And I just looked up in the sky and I started screaming at God. I really did. I was so upset with God. And I'm even like an atheist. I don't even really know that I believe in God, but I was so upset with him anyway about all that. And like I'm just freaking out and screaming and everything. And then I feel a hand on my shoulder, and it's Violet, my beautiful, wonderful girlfriend. And she just sort of helps me up, and and we walked back to the hotel room. And we were never apart from that moment on, except during interrogations. And it was extraordinary. This was a gal, she wasn't anybody's mother. We weren't married. She could have looked at me and said, dude, this ain't my fight, and just turned around and walked on me, but she didn't. It was unbelievable. She actually watched my back like nobody's ever watched my back before. She's an extraordinary, extraordinary woman. So anyway, all of these things are going on, and we're trying to keep this story alive. And I hit a wall, man. I did. I hit a wall. They called me to the police station one day, and I go there. And the Petaluma Police Station is a small building. It's not large at all. So I went in and reported, and they said, oh, just wait outside. So I'm outside waiting, and like after 20 minutes, it's like, what's going on? And again, there wasn't distractions. It was just me inside my head. And that's not a good place to be in a time like that. And I said, oh, they don't want to tell me that Paulie's dead. And then it's like, oh, God, Paulie's dead. It's like I started freaking out. I mean, literally freaking out. I just was like crumbling. And by the time Eddie Fryer, the FBI agent, got there, I was on the ground in a fetal position. I was all curled up. It was just terrible. And he goes, and he comes in, he looks at me, and goes, Mark, what the hell? What's going on? And he goes, Eddie, I can't take it anymore. I can't do this anymore. And he goes, what do you mean you can't do this anymore? And I said, well, I'm worn out. I got nothing left. I'm running on empty. I was just pulling 70 rock cliche, verses. I'm running on empty, Eddie. And he goes, what are you talking about? He goes, listen. He goes, what do you think's going on here? And I said, oh, we're trying to look for Paulie, but I can't do it anymore. And he goes, hey, didn't you tell your daughter that you'd always be there for her? And I go, yeah, Eddie, every father does that. And he goes, and now you're bailing on her when she needs you more than ever? You're going to do that? And it's like, oh, Jesus, really? And so I said, oh, Eddie, I don't know what to do. And this guy, Eddie was this little skinny guy, man. FBI guy, 5'6" or something, just a little skinny guy. And he reaches over and he just picks me up. And I'm like, in the middle of all this madness, I'm going, how did he do that? How the hell did he do that? Well, it turns out that Eddie was like a world-class triathlete, but I didn't know that at the time. And then we're standing there face to face. He goes, look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. And I'm looking him in the eye, and he goes, what do you think this is all about? He goes, why do you think these people are here? And I said, they want to find Paulie. And he goes, they're inspired by you. That's what he said. They're inspired by you. And he said, take a look at all these volunteers. Take a look at these reporters. Take a look at these policemen. He says, if it wasn't for you, they wouldn't be here. He said, this is a war. You're the general. And I'm like, Jesus, dude, I'm falling apart. But I didn't say that. I'm just thinking it. And he goes, the volunteers will turn and walk away. The reporters will go on to other assignments. The police officers will stop working double duty and they'll go back to their normal assignments and we'll never know what happened to your daughter. Is that what you want? And I go, no, man, that's not what I want. And he says, then look at me. And he goes, I want you to go back to your hotel room, and we were staying in a room, and I want you to take a nap, and I want you to think about what I said, and I want you to come out ready to fight and ready to do something every day to bring your daughter home. And if you do that, I guarantee that we'll find Paulie. And so I did exactly what he said. And I had a new attitude, and I understood things in that moment. That was an epiphany for me. Because I understood about responsibility, I understood about parenthood, and I understood things about leadership that I had never even considered before in my life. And I did exactly what Eddie said. And I came out with a lot of enthusiasm. I was a rental car guy. I don't know how to lead the troops. Goodness gracious. That's what West Point is for. That's what Annapolis is for. So I figured, what can I do? I said, I can put on a good face and I can thank everybody. And that's what I did. I spent the next several weeks thanking people, patting them. I was the hugger. I was hugging everybody. I was thanking everybody. It was the craziest thing. But it was good. It was good for me, and it was good for the case, and it was good for Polly, because it stayed alive, ladies and gentlemen. That story stayed alive for 65 days. On the 59th day, Polly's mom and I got a call from the Petaluma police to come into the police station. We did that, and they said, we got the guy that did it. And it's like, what? And they showed us a picture of a guy. And they said, do you know him? And I know, I'm sorry, let me set this scene. It's the police chief's office. It's an FBI agent named Mark Mershon. It's a Petaluma police captain named Pat Parks. It's Polly's mother, and it's myself. We're the only 4 people in the room. And so we're looking at the picture, and they're like looking at us, you know, and I'm like, I've never seen this guy before. Who is this guy? And it was an old Polaroid picture. It was a really bad picture, and the lighting was horrible. And it kind of looked like the composite on the sketch, but on the sketch it was a white guy. And I'm looking, I said, is this guy a black guy? Because the lighting was so bad. They go, no, he's not a black guy. I said, well, I don't know who this guy is. And Eve didn't know who this guy is. Well, it turned out his name was Richard Allen Davis. 3 months previously, he'd been released from serving half of a 16-year sentence for kidnapping. It was his second kidnapping. This is a guy who had a history of intimidating, kidnapping, and attempted sexual assaults on women with things like guns, knives, fireplace pokers. One old girlfriend committed suicide in his presence with a shotgun back in the 70s. 2 of them in the room, and she committed suicide with a shotgun. I'm not quite sure I really even understand that. But somehow this guy had been sentenced to over 200 years in prison over the course of his criminal history, but he was out to get a hold of my daughter. So they said, listen, you've got to get used to the fact that she's dead. You're kidding me, right? We got into a brouhaha. We had words that I'm not going to repeat here, but they were angry words, and they had a note of finality about them, and I told them that I would if they found my child, I would listen to their opinions, and then I left. And listen, man, I tell you, this thing was taking a physical toll that you can't believe. I had lost 30 pounds. 30 pounds I wish I could lose today. But I had lost 30 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. My mind was ready to snap. I had been in a very dark place for a long, long time. And I had been fueled by adrenaline through that entire journey. That was my fuel. I sweated so badly that I wore out tennis shoes. I think I went through 3 or 4 pair of tennis shoes. They would end up stinking so badly that I couldn't hug the people because I stunk too badly. So by this time, my back was gone. I'd always had a few back problems. It was all thrown out. I was spending a lot of time laying down. And from the time that we had that conversation in the police station to the time the truth was revealed was about 4 days. And I spent that 4 days on my back on the floor in the living room of the apartment that we were staying in, watching TV. And it was the story that dominated everything in the Bay Area in the end of 1993, in the last week of November, the first week of December of 1993. And there would be these breathless reporters reporting on a dog bone as being Polly's remains. I mean, it was crazy. So I knew something, though. I knew that that wasn't true because the police made a promise to me at the very, very beginning. They said, this is the person that you will report to. This is the person that will take your call, and you will never hear anything relevant about this case from a reporter. You will only hear it from us first. So I knew that these reports of finding Polly's remains weren't real, and it's like, oh my God, this is awful. So at any rate, they called us back in again They called Paulie's mom and I back in again on the 4th of December. And when I got there, man, you didn't need to tell me anything. They all were crying. The FBI guy was crying. The cop was crying. Paulie's poor mom, she was just sitting at a table with her hands in her face, her face in her hands, just sobbing. And it's like, no, man, don't. And they said, Mark, they said, we found her, man. They said, he confessed. He took us to the freeway off-ramp where he dumped her body on a pile of garbage. And we don't think you should view the remains. We think you should remember her as she was in her life. And still, I didn't cry. I said, look, can I call our families? Can we call our families so that they can hear this from us and not hear it on the news? And they said, yes, of course. Within 15 minutes, the police chief's office was full of family members, sobbing, choking, heads hung down, eyes closed. There was such a feeling of misery in the room. And then I said, I still wasn't crying. And it's like, what's wrong with me, I'm really beginning to wonder that. And I said, can I call over to the volunteer center and tell them so they don't hear it on the news? And he said, yeah, you can do that. So I called over and I spoke to somebody, I spoke to somebody and I said, man, I'm so sorry, but it turned out badly. So then finally there was nothing to do, The fight was done. I mean, it was over. So we got in our cars and we went home. First time in 65 days, we went back to our condo. And I remember, it was a silent ride. I remember as we got out on the little street that is in front of our house, that our house is on, it was in December and there were dead leaves on the ground. And I thought, how beautiful are these leaves in death? And it just was a random thought. We went into the house and somebody lit a fire. And then Violet and I laid down just completely and totally exhausted. And then it all hit me. Man, it just was unbelievable. It just hit me like a tsunami. It was like a primal scream that emerged from like my inner organs or something. It was insanity. But I just started screaming and yelling and crying, and I got up and I started flailing at things. And fortunately, there were all these guys in my house, and they just held me down until it subsided. I have no idea. The only thing I remember is one of my sisters-in-law, she looked at me, and she doesn't handle a lot of stress very well. She looked at me, and she goes, "Oh, I'm going out for a walk." Why do you remember some things? I don't know. But they held me, and finally we calmed down, and then the next morning I got up and I just took a walk down by the bay, and I started skipping rocks on the bay. It was very calm. And I thought, I'm the loneliest guy. I'm more alone than anybody else on this earth, and I wanted to be dead. I just wanted to be with my kid. I mean, that's what it was all about. That's all it was about. So at any rate, I know this story is getting really long. At any rate, I started skipping the stones, and I saw the concentric circles, and they would expand, and they would cross with each other. And I said, that's kind of what our relationships have been like. We've made all of these relationships with different people from different disciplines, and we really did what we had to do to get Paulie's case out there. And it was solved. I mean, I had something that none of those other parents ever had. Sometimes you don't really want what you wish for, but at least I knew that nobody was hurting my girl anymore. And it was a sexual assault, by the way. That's why these guys do this. That's totally what this is about. So later that day, Violet and I were walking, and I said, I can't go back to Hertz. I said, I'm going to continue doing this work. And maybe we can prevent another child from following in Paulie's footsteps. And she said to me, and this was amazing, again, this woman, we're not married, none of this stuff. She goes, we'll survive. You do what you have to do, and I'll work, and we'll live frugally, and we'll find a way to get through this. So that's exactly what we did. We figured we had a 90-day window of opportunity to get something done. And we immediately rejected all of the book deals that were coming our way. People wanted to do movies, they wanted to do books, they wanted to do all of the... Oprah called, right? We tried to get on Oprah's show. Nah, she wasn't interested at all until it was all said and done. And then she called and she goes, we'd like to have you on the show now. And we said, what's the point? You want to parade me? We didn't say this, but it's like, no, we're not going to do your show. So we turned down all of those deals, and we started pursuing a legislative agenda. And it was really a legislative agenda that was focused ultimately on preventing what happened in Paulie's case from happening again. In her case, a previously diagnosed sexually sadistic psychopath was put through a turnstile system of justice that regurgitated him back into society time and time and time again. And every time he would get back, the nature of his crime would escalate. So what happened to my daughter was inevitable. Given the state of the criminal justice system in the state of California or in the United States at that time, nobody was being held accountable for the crimes that they committed. There were all of these ins and outs. The whole system was based on a lie. That you go into a courtroom and a judge hands down a sentence and you think, okay, that's good. This guy's going to be in prison for 16 years to life or 25 years to life. But actually, in less than half of that time, they'd be back on the streets again. And oftentimes the victims or the victim families would not even be notified. So we thought, we can fix this. There's got to be something we can do about this. So we engaged in a series of initiatives. Most of them not of our own choosing, and certainly not of our own design. But we got behind things over the next couple of years like truth in sentencing. Truth in sentencing says that if you're sentenced to a certain amount of time in prison, you have to serve at least 85% of that time behind bars. That became national policy. In fact, President Clinton made $10 billion available to the states if they would institute truth in sentencing policies within the states. He made the money available for prison construction. We got behind things like the 3 strikes and you're outlaw. I know how controversial it is. We got through things like Megan's Law, the registration and community notification of sex offenders in the United States. And again, I know that these are all controversial, but I'll tell you what, within 2 years, crime in the United States, violent crime in the United States, had been cut in half. Cut in half. And now, we're seeing all of that undone. And I have no doubt in my mind that I'm speaking to 90% liberals in this room, and that probably the people in this room applaud all of the things that Governor Brown is doing to alleviate prison overcrowding and to give guys second chances. But between the various initiatives that he's done, we're at a point now where, and what he's done is he's taken tens of thousands of criminals, and they say, we're only going for the nonviolent guys, we're only going for the low-level drug dealers. That's not who's in our prisons. In order to get into a prison in the state of California, you've got to be a pretty bad guy. The average prisoner in a California state facility has an average of somewhere between 3 and 8 felony convictions before they ever see that. So they're all going back out onto the streets now. A roll of toilet paper has more value than a sentence handed down by a judge in a criminal proceeding in California today. And I'll tell you this, and I'm fighting a lot of this stuff, but hey, who am I? Things are going to get a whole lot worse in the state of California before they get better. Do we have any time left, Alan? Huh? No. Shit. Thank you. Thank you.